jurisdiction, but there's no reason we can't consult our traffic engineer to see how we can reconstruction the streets, work with our city attorney to see if there's an ordinance we can put in to make it more difficult to drive through, take shortcuts. But we really need to work with Torrance. Most of the traffic, like Dave said, is going to be coming down the hill, going down Hawthorne Boulevard.
Yeah.
And what we need to do is work with Torrance for the timing of the lights. And the last thing you need to do is, they hit every light. I mean, if they time the lights right, the traffic will flow. That's really how I see it.
Thank you. Ms. Peterson?
When the residents around Via Valmonte first came up to the council and wanted us to do something about it, I said the only thing that we could really do, this is prior to the Torrance City Council election, is to talk to the city council candidates to see who supports it and who doesn't. And if they wanted some of our endorsement, we would go with the people that wouldn't want to support the Butcher Solana project. So as the previous two candidates have mentioned, this is the Torrance jurisdiction. The only thing that we can really fight on is when they come up with their environmental impact report to challenge their sincerity, challenge their data, to make sure that whatever their report is, it actually is telling the truth. Because right now they're telling us there's no traffic impact. They're telling us there's no air quality impact. They're telling us there's no noise quality impact, but I don't think that's true. So once that report comes down, then we have some grounds to stand on and challenge the developers. That's it.
Thank you. Ms. Lozey?
So I think our residents are looking to our city council for help. And I think people over and over again come to a city council meeting and say, we need help, we need help. We have this situation, this development that's going to hurt our city. And our city council, existing city council keeps saying, oh, take it up with Torrance. That's not an answer. You need somebody who's going to help you fight the fight. Go talk to Torrance, wait for the environmental impact report. Well, now you're leaving these residents out there trying to kind of come up with their own grassroots effort of how to deal with this thing. Okay, I don't know, maybe the rules are we have to wait. Maybe step one is you have to wait for this report to come out. I don't know. But I know that we got to fight for our residents, and we got to be willing to say, okay, let's look at it. Let's see. I know there was a community forum, and maybe the city council took some notes on that, but I have not seen the city council in any way step up and say, okay, let's make a plan.
Yes.
Excuse me. Mr. Kemps?
Here comes some more yes. So I went and sat down with them because there are a lot of people in Valmonte that are really, 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 really upset about this. We chatted about some ideas where we can actually contribute. First of all, a bit of warning. When that environmental impact study comes out, we have 45 days to respond to that study before it proceeds forward in the city of Torrance. So we can yell, scream, holler, write letters, et cetera, but we're only going to have 45 days. We can get ahead of it. We can develop an objective study. We could use a prelim environmental report to start working on that response. Maybe develop our own objective assessments. We can look at the traffic flow at Hawthorne Boulevard where Via Valmonte hits it. Some other thoughts is, maybe we locate a very sharp land use attorney and understand what our own city options are, rather than just assuming that it's Torrance and nothing else. The other thing I think we can do is we can form partnerships with our other cities in Palos Verdes because we aren't going to be the only ones concerned.
Ms. Lozey?
Ms. King.
Ms. King. Ms. King. Thank you.
We have heard from residents on this project, and initially we did start, we had a forum with the developer and the residents so the residents could learn more about the project. We did take residents' concerns at that forum, and we had an online portal for residents to express their concerns. So we do have some idea of what the issues will be when the environmental impact report is ready. Until that impact report is prepared, we don't know how Torrance has chosen to mitigate some of those impacts that we've been talking about, traffic, noise. And so until we know what they've done to try to mitigate them, there's really no point in our responding. And if we responded now, we do lose credibility because then it would just be shown we weren't going to like anything they tried to do. We are ready for when that report comes in. We have a noise engineer prepared, a traffic engineer. We have a large law firm that has land use attorneys that can look at that and evaluate and see what is the most effective response to that report when it comes in, what will convince the Torrance City Council that the impacts haven't been adequately mitigated.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to move on to some questions regarding the parklands, which we really haven't touched on in detail yet. Some feel like the trails in our parklands need to be better maintained or even expanded. Others don't like seeing people walking on the trails and advocate for less or only limited public access in parklands. Where do you stand when it comes to public access to parkland trails and the role of the city in maintaining trails and parklands? Mr. McCarthy.
Well, we can't limit access to parklands. The purpose of them being parklands is everybody has access. The second thing is the maintenance. It goes back to one of the other topics we talked about. The first thing you need to look at is because of our limited resources. Again, it comes back to money. Because of our limited resources, it comes back to the things we look at is safety, and then easy use. So I think everybody should have access to the parklands. I think that the city needs to take a look at any of the safety issues, low-lying branches, maybe roots that come up from the ground where people can trip and fall. But I treasure the parklands. It's one of the reasons I moved up here and I live up here, and I'd like to see them maintained and used.
Okay, Ms. Peterson.
I think we should preserve our natural beauty and not overdevelop our trails. My kids and my husband and I would try to hike a different trail, once a month or something. And it's nice to be out in nature, even though we're so close to the city. If we were to develop them and, groom them or make sure that the roots are not sticking out and all that stuff, I think that takes away from what the natural beauty is. And in turns, if the city starts maintaining these trails and make them true public trails and have them mapped out and all that, it becomes the city's liability because now we're maintaining them, and how dare we not keep them safe? So I think it's best just to keep it as is and let people explore themselves.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Lozey.
Yep, I think we need, the parklands are for access for everyone without encroachments. I guess I was thinking more maintenance from more of a safety perspective and a fire. I do think, we don't want to be penny wise and pound foolish and under-maintain. Now we've had a lot of rain, but in the dry years, sometimes it seems like maybe they should be cleared a little bit better. So I don't want to throw, financial hardship and then create something that isn't properly maintained for fire, to protect against fire. So that, when I think of maintenance, that's more what I think of it as opposed to development. So, but yep, access without encroachments for all.
Mr. Kemps.
We absolutely need to maintain our natural style of our paths and our natural areas. We have to keep them cleared for fire. And the other issue that we have to be very careful about and has been discussed recently is pesticides. We're presently using Roundup in our city, which is a cancer-causing carcinogen, and there's been recent litigation around that, and I think we need to stop it. We need to find other methods to control that.
Okay, Ms. King.
Yes, I really do enjoy hiking our trails, and I do like them in their natural state. Of course, we do maintain the areas for fire clearance, but I think the question goes to, should we enhance the trails? Should we make them more beautiful, maybe more accessible? And that, I think, for a number of reasons, we probably aren't going to go in that direction. Of course, one is resources, another is potential liability, another is the cautionary tale presented by the intersection of Crest and Crenshaw, where lots of people enjoy those trails now. And I don't think that's an atmosphere that we necessarily want our city to have. And there's no Roundup use in the parklands.
Okay, Mr. McGowan.
Well, I think we absolutely have to keep access open for these trails, but I would like to give you an example of a model that we've used in Los Angeles. I'm part of the Los Angeles Parks Foundation, one of the founding members, and we've done adopt-a-park programs in the city of Los Angeles. Well, we'll go to an existing business and say, why don't you adopt a park for X dollars per year and maintain it. It's a model that we could use in Palos Verdes, whether it be on trails or whether it be for our parks, but it's another way of maintaining and enhancing some of our public parklands without encroaching on the budget of the city. And we do this through a 501c3 foundation, which is something that I would definitely encourage our community to reevaluate.
Thank you very much. Okay, Ms. Peterson, we have one more parks question. There's often conflict in the city between those who believe PVE's urban forest of mature trees improves their property values and defines or contributes to neighborhood character, and those who believe that having a 180-degree unimpeded view is a right. Where do you see yourself? Are you a tree person or a view person?
Can I be both?
You can.
You know, I think trees actually add to the view. 180 degrees of unimpeded ocean view is gorgeous, but I think having the trees in there makes it even more beautiful and more natural-like. I think it really depends on the residents. You know, I'm not in your living room. I'm not looking out at your view. I cannot decide what you would determine as more valuable. And so, you know, a lot of these cases come up to the city council, and we have to take it case by case. It's not one size fits all. With that said, I know there's a couple of big trees in front of my big windows, and I'm okay with that. You know, I'm okay with having them there. And so, like I said, it's case by case. I can't say that I am a tree or a view person. I think I'm both. I think
Both.
trees are part of the view.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Lozey.
So that's one of mine. So for people who know me, I often say I think life is like a bell curve. And you have kind of the two extremes, but most of life happens in the middle. So you have the 180 degrees at all costs, and the tree should never be cut down. And then I think you have real life happens in the middle. And so I think you do. The thing that I think you most need is you know, neighbors need to kind of work together respectfully and collaboratively. I think you have to come into that conversation, you know, willing to find a compromise, and I'd like to see that a little bit more. I think we've gotten to where people kind of go in expecting a battle, and I'd like to find a way to. And I think the Parklands Committee tries to help find the middle, but. Yep, I think you have the extremes, and then most of life is in the middle, and we have to find a way to get that to work for everyone.
Mr. Camps.
I think the other thing to add is it varies based on areas, right? So, you know, using Upper Lanada Bay, looking down at trees that are in your way of a wide expanse of open view, as opposed to, you know, Malaga Cove that maybe has fewer trees and impacts specific neighbors. I think the point about collaborating between neighbors is huge. I'll share our own story. We're remodeling a house on Villa Del Monte. We move into the house. A couple people that are neighbors look at our lot, and they look up and they say, "What do you think of that eucalyptus tree?" And my wife and I look up and say, "We love that tree," right? So everyone has different views, and I think we need to collaborate as neighbors and be willing to cut where people in front or behind us have view impacts, and we did that as good neighbors. And I think we can all get along and not have battles over it. We have enough to battle.
Okay, Ms. King.
I do think it's all about balance. I'm a tree person and a view person, and our system is a little complicated by the fact that there are two bodies that control trees and views. So we have the city process with the Parklands Committee for our public trees, and I think actually that process works really well. I've listened to several of the Parklands hearings, and people are really able to balance the trees and views, whereas private trees do go through the Homes Association, and so that's an entirely different process. I think that trees and views, it is part about being neighbors and appreciating the interests of our neighbors and really just being more neighborly. And I think a lot of our issues would be minimized if we were just all a little bit more neighborly.
Thank you. Mr. McGowan.
Well, I also agree with the balance between the trees and the views, but I do know that in the area of Lanada Bay where I live, more and more buildings or remodels have been done where the foliage has been limited to the ridge line of the house, which I think has been a big asset in maintaining some of the views and yet having the balance of the trees. There's one specific species in our neighborhood that is very much of a concern to me, and that's the canary pines, because they grow so doggone tall, and if they fall, they're going to take out some homes as well as they already obstruct a lot of the views. And I think that this is something that we, at some point in time, need to consider.
Thank you. Mr. McCarthy.
I agree with my colleagues. There's a balance, depending on where you live. I have trees in my backyard, and I love looking at the trees, but if I climb on my roof, I can peek through the trees and see the ocean. So it's a little bit of both worlds. But if it's really about the neighbors, and it's really about getting along, and I like Dave's suggestion about maybe limiting the kind of trees, or at least keeping them trimmed to a certain height, because some of those pines, those go up forever. It's like a tall building out there.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Lozey, this question, it says, where do you stand on mansionization? The deed restrictions for PVE limit the height to 30 feet and square footage of a residential structure to the lesser of 50% of lot size or 30% of lot size plus 1,750 square feet. At what point does a home that meets these constraints become a mansion and subject to additional limitations through the neighborhood compatibility ordinance?
Wow. So the, to me, mansionization, which is kind of a dopey word, I guess, but that to me is far and away, we talk a lot about the finances and all these things, but to me, that is the biggest issue that concerns our residents. Again, going back to that Davenport Institute a couple of years ago, when there was there were community forums and people wrote, what's your biggest concern? Far and away, there were four of those forums around the city. I went to all four. Number one, mansionization. My observation is that I think we've got a little tilted. I think we need more. The city council should give marching orders to the planning commission and then hold the planning commission accountable for results. I think this constant appealing has become a mess. But I think the biggest problem is people think of views and they say, oh, there's no view impact, therefore this house is okay. And to me, the biggest issue, and maybe the definition of mansionization, is massing and looming. So to me, that's the biggest problem.
I'm with you. Let me add two things. One, we don't consider the overall volume of the house. So we look at massing and we look at looming, and we're worried about view, and we're trying to comply with an NCO, but the overall volume of the home, I'm not sure that we're actually looking at those calcs. I think our process is broken. People go and they get their plans. They spend $30,000 with an architect. They've never met their neighbor before because they just bought the lot. They proceed along in the process, and all of a sudden the fight begins when the NCO meeting happens. I'd like to develop a standard process between the Homes Association Planning Commission that actually gets this under control, hands a nice, beautiful, slick, glossy document, no matter where someone goes inside the city, and says, this is how it's going to work. And this is how you get through the process. And I think that educational process would be extraordinarily helpful.
Okay. Ms. King?
The vast majority of our planning projects do go through on the first Planning Commission meeting. However, increasingly there have been some very large homes proposed in our city that have generated quite a bit of opposition because of the impacts they're having on their neighbors. And to me, mansionization is not necessarily, it's not just a big house, it's a big house in the wrong place. And we have had a couple of those projects. I believe that the parameters that were mentioned in the context of the question, maybe we do need to look at those again, because the people who are proposing these houses are building within what our code allows. And yet, increasingly, we are not permitting residents to build out to those codes. So maybe we just need to set expectations a little clearer for all parties. Certainly, there are other metrics that we need to look at, such as gross floor area. That's not included in the calculation that we measure now. It's a figure that we get, but it's something that can really make a house seem much more impactful to the neighbors. And so I think that's another thing that we need to consider, whether that should be some kind of requirement.
Mr. McGowan?
Yeah, I think we need to keep in mind our neighborhood compatibility and look at the neighborhood in which we're talking about. There's not one shoe that fits all, in my opinion. We can go into the terrace area of Malaga Cove, and an oversized home there may not be viewed as oversized up on top of the hill. And I believe that we need to have a more streamlined process of how we set expectations between the Homes Association and the City Council. And I will just throw one additional comment in there that one of my colleagues up here recently did a mediation on a dispute with having to do with the size and views of a home. And I think this was a successful project, as I understand it, and I would encourage us to consider utilizing more of the arbitration process in the future.
Mr. McCarthy?
I agree with one of my colleagues. I like Jennifer's idea of looking at the business, the code again, and there's not one plan fits all, depending on where you live and the neighborhood compatibility. So, you know, I'm a big I like having the open space. I live on a street where there's a couple of double lots, and there were single homes on them. People lived in them since the 50s, and contractors are buying them up, and they're putting up two beach houses on them. So I would like to take a look at and kind of freezing some of those double lots. So if it has a single house on it, it can stay a single house. Now, I don't know if that's something we can do legally, but I think I enjoy the space that we have, and we already have enough traffic and enough people, and so I want to preserve the lots that we have.
Ms. Peterson?
I think mansionization has gotten a really bad rep. To me, mansionization really isn't about being the mansion. It's more about being just not keeping up with the neighborhood character. So the City Council and the Planning Commissions just had a joint meeting, and we talked about some of the ways to improve the process. And one of the things that was discussed was that if we're not approving up to 50%, why are we still having that as the threshold? Why can't we lower that down? Also, regarding data, before we were not using the gross volume, and sometimes, a lot of times, the architect know the loophole, and so they will put a storage underneath the staircase or a 5-car garage or something that adds to the volume of the property instead of just what the square footage actually says. So there's a lot of things that I think we can refine, and we're also working with the Homes Association to make this an easier process.
Okay, thank you. We begin with Mr. Kemps now. Some in PBE want to see the city-owned beach club expand memberships in order to reduce the wait list and/or reduce day use fees to increase access for non-members. Others report that the beach club is already at full capacity and that such changes would reduce the quality of the club experience for both current and future members and day users. Since the City Council has the authority to determine both the number of memberships available and the amount of the day use fees, what changes, if any, would you advocate for when it comes to the beach club?
I think we have to realize that in the early 90s, a bunch of people got together privately and actually really brought that place back together. I remember being in middle school in the late 80s, and that property was entirely shut down and ready to be condemned. So I think it's absolutely gorgeous. I'm not a member, but I'm absolutely respectful of what's there. I think the current council puts a lot of pressure on that beach club. I think they're holding back an agreement in order to try and press them and push them into having more membership. I think it needs to be controlled. I think there's a reasonable compromise to be found with a very small increase. I also understand that there are some ADU issues relative to compliance, and that the beach club is sensitive about having to invest in that because there is no 20-year agreement. So I think that all can be attacked and resolved, and I'd be in favor of a 20-year agreement with a reasonable increase in membership.
Ms. King?
The beach club contract came up for renewal, I think, in 2016, and at that point there were no renewals left on the contract. So we're in that last 10-year period, and I certainly understand why the beach club is interested in obtaining an extension to give its members and potential members some certainty. It's a tremendous city asset, and I do appreciate the fact that it was residents, really, who were able to build that asset and maintain it. However, there are a lot of times when it's really underutilized, and I know we can't make residents go there on sort of a dreary afternoon, but I would like to see us be maybe a little more creative with different types of membership tiers. There seemed to be a concern when we were talking about the agreement before that increased membership would crowd the gym. So perhaps we can have some type of membership that wouldn't have gym access, or we can have just weekday memberships or different tiers. And I recognize that's a little difficult for staff to monitor, but I think in this case, increasing access is really important, and being creative is equally important.
Mr. McGowan?
I think we just need to have some open dialogue with the beach